the session on this or any other topics, please reach out to s3@gsa.gov. So without further ado, let me introduce Peter Bastone. He is going to be our GSA eBuy expert today. He is from GSA's systems management team, and he is going to provide us with a background on eBuy, how it works from a buyer's perspective, how it works for even your perspective, and how to edit and change some of the contact information that you will need to do as well. So, Peter, it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming, and thanks for having me here to do this presentation. I have been teaching eBuy in some way, shape, or form since probably about 2004, but this is the first time I have gotten to teach the combination of 8A stars, GWAC holders, as well as sellers. So this was a learning experience for me as well, as I got to research your side of the transaction and capture the screens and figure out how it all works and how to show it to you. So let's jump right in. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of eBuy and how it's used. We're going to have a quick discussion on how you register and how you get your FAS ID, what that looks like. We'll run through the RFQ process by creating a sample RFQ as a buyer and then quoting on it as a seller. I'll show you how you can manage your users, your points of contacts inside eBuy, and then we'll have some time for questions. Start off by talking about what eBuy actually is. Back in about 2002, as the need to procure services almost outstripped the need to procure products, GSA introduced eBuy as an online request for quotation tool that has a simple process to let the buyer post a request and the seller answer that request. Originally, it was limited only to the schedules program, but since then, we've added blanket purchase agreements and GWACs. As I mentioned, eBuy is primarily used for requesting quotes for services, but a lot of buyers will also use it to obtain volume discounts if they can get a better deal beyond contract pricing. I'm not 100% sure how applicable that is to these contracts, but in general, some of the schedule buyers, if they're buying a large volume of something, might post an RFQ to try and get better pricing. In cases where the procurement involves a combination of a product or a service, eBuy is extremely useful for that. For determining sources of supply by posting a request for information, that's a scenario where a buyer might upload the request and some attachments, but is not necessarily looking for a formal quote at that point. Perhaps they're doing their market research, trying to see what sources are out there. And it's, as we're here for, useful for obtaining quotes directly against the blanket purchase agreements or the GWACs. eBuy recently went through a pretty drastic redesign. So let's talk for a moment a bit about what is new. Of course, the 8A Stars 3 contracts were literally just loaded about a week ago. That was turned on not too long ago. We have implemented multi-factor authentication by way of, on the buyer side, you can use Google Authenticator, your email, phone, text, similar precautions on the seller side. We have implemented login based on your PIV or your CAC card. That was a very highly requested feature. We completed the schedules consolidation, in which over almost 30 schedules were consolidated into one. On the back end, we've upgraded the platform to use Angular. The workflow itself and the user experience now has overlays in the form of modals, which are much more snappy to use. Instead of having to reload a page, you'll see functionality just pop up over the page. So in general, it makes the site a lot easier. We've also enhanced the creation of purchase orders, and we've implemented APIs and PO portal integration on the back end. Let's talk a little bit about the activity going through this system. In the last fiscal year, we had about 47,000 RFQs representing an estimated $20 billion in award value go through eBuy. Of those RFQs, about a quarter of them were set-asides for small business, and the average quotes per each closed RFQ is 3. It's a nice, sweet number there, just enough to be competitive, but not so many that you're going to have more work than you might have. We counted over 95 RFQs that had $1 million or more in award value, And the top 3 posters, as always, are some combination of the Air Force, Army, and Navy. The commodities that were purchased, IT, the OASIS contract, and law enforcement, with a surprising number, no, not surprising number, with a large number of that towards the consolidated schedule as that was implemented. I just got the numbers for July 2021, so I thought I'd add those in as well. We've seen 33,000 RFQs close fiscal year to date, which is up from 27,000 in June. Now, specifically against the different GWACs, we counted, well, this is against STARS 2, we counted 34 against STARS 2, 239 against Alliant, and 320 against Oasis. So may not be as populous as the schedules, but the buyers are definitely out there. Again, still our Air Force, Army, and Navy holding the top 3 slots, but I always like to point out that GSA is number 5. I believe Veterans Affairs is number 4. We, GSA, are big users of our own system. We post RFQs pretty regularly to claim the 5th spot. And again, the top 3 categories, all the schedule consolidation completed, we've got that, and contained therein generally IT, office, and hardware. As far as what buyers post RFQs for, in the schedules world, it can be pretty benign, but sometimes pretty interesting. You'll see some RFQs for things like office furniture, IT equipment like monitors. We've seen ones for water treatment services and shredding services. Saw one for a Tai Chi instructor, and I even saw one for a theodolite once. So that was very unique. Looking through the different 8A stars examples, I saw RFQs requesting a Linux administrator, request for information on JAWS scripting, someone looking for waterway analysis management system development, environmental management services. And just this morning, I saw one for 2 actually for a 5G cybersecurity subject matter expert. So just a little taste of what kind of business is going through eBuy and what buyers are looking to purchase. This is not a definitive list, and I understand that for your contract vehicle, the requests are probably fit a little bit more inside of a more of a standard with less variety. Nevertheless, shows how versatile eBuy can be, that on the same system you could buy office furniture or a 5G cybersecurity expert. So let's talk a little bit about registration and getting your FAS ID. Now, this is something I understand was covered in your intro course when you were first getting onboarded. So I will cover it quickly now. The FAS ID is a pretty new concept that we implemented. A while back, one would log into eBuy using the contract number and a common password. So that's since been changed to this FAS ID concept, which is based on Okta. That's who we use for our authentication. So there are 2 types of users here. There's brand new registrants, those who have never ever had a FAS ID before, and then there's folks who already have a FAS ID for some other application. Perhaps they're doing the sales reporting for their company, perhaps they're answering the mass mods. In either case, they need to get set up in eBuy. It's just a little bit more for first-time users who have never had one before. When you initiate the request, either by going to your company point of contact or by working with the vendor support center or your customer service director, you'll get an email welcoming you to Okta, where you'll be able to activate your account. Silly me, I didn't capture the middle screen. It's basically just a form fill where you put in your email address, your password, and a couple of secret questions. You'll then be moved to the next screen where you set up your multi-factor authentication. I personally like to set up 2 different types. I like Google Authenticator and I like email. But if you want to do SMS, voice call, do all 4, it's up to you. I believe you should set this up the first time you go through. I don't believe you get the opportunity to add them later. I know that's something we want to work on, but right now I believe you get it's just best to do it up front. So it also helps to set up 2 methods in case something should ever happen with your email address or your phone number. I think we've had instances, rare instances, but instances where someone had to redo their multi-factor because of their phone number changed. Once you are set up with your FAS ID, you'll see a kind of dashboard like this that will have a lot more tiles depending on how many applications your FAS ID works with. But if you click on GSA eBuy, it should take you inside of eBuy, where you will see, and I've zoomed out a lot here to fit the whole thing, the logged in welcome screen. If you click the Find Opportunities Now button in the middle of the screen, you will be taken to a listing of any RFQ that has been posted under the 8A Stars 3 program. Now, before we delve into this anymore, and I will go into this in more detail, let's take a moment to talk about how those RFQs got there in the first place. For the moment, we're going to pose as a buyer who's going to create an RFQ that, in our example, we will respond to. A quick overview of the RFQ process in general. Buyers will find sources and prepare the RFQ. They'll go into eBuy, and depending on which program they want to post the RFQ under, they can browse, they can do a keyword search, they can look by the entirety of the program. That ultimately drills them down to companies whom they can research, they can look at their price lists, they can look at their text files. Once the buyer has selected companies, then they input basic RFQ information. So things like a title, a description, they can attach documents, they can input line items, they can even bring those over from GSA Advantage. They'll configure their delivery and their shipping, and then they'll post the RFQ. That's the point where the RFQ will appear in the list for you folks to find. So as a seller, you would come in and you can either look at the list of opportunities that have been posted, or perhaps you got an email notification. Either way, you arrive in eBuy, you open the RFQ, you respond to the quote by putting in your pricing, either at the line item level or overall. You can attach files, you can attach any documentation that you might want, and then you submit the quote and wait for the vendor to the buyer to evaluate. When the RFQ is closed, the buyers will go through, finish their evaluations, and make an award notification. So that's, in general, the overview of the RFQ process. So imagine you are a buyer. You have arrived at the eBuy home screen, which is located at www.ebuy.gsa.gov. You would log in. You would click Prepare an RFQ Now. And you would arrive at this screen where you can, as I mentioned, keyword search, browse, or look at solutions in their entirety. In this example, we'll click on Technology Contracts, and a modal will pop up with all of the available technology contracts. We will click on 8A Stars, which will open up that solution, and we will see the different areas underneath, different categories underneath 8A Stars. And when we click on the Select Vendors button, we will arrive at a screen that shows all of the vendors and a couple of disclaimers that we have to acknowledge. The buyer can filter the list if they want to by city and state, although that is a full text search that's not specific to any one category. And we do encourage the buyers, well, we remind the buyers that the city and state is sometimes a corporate address, so not to just focus on someone in their local area. When the buyer has gone through and selected the companies to whom they wish to send the RFQ, and I do understand that the GWACs work differently, they'll click Continue, and then they will arrive at a screen where they will input their information. Here's what the buyer is going to put into the RFQ. They'll put in a title for the RFQ, a description, and they'll set a close date. Close date can be a minimum of 2 days, but the default is 5. The buyer will specify delivery terms based on whether they're ordering products or services. They have different choices there. They can add line items if they've maybe brought them over from a shopping cart from GSA Advantage, or if they've done market research and have part numbers and item names and all that. They can attach any documentation that they might find useful. That will be available to you when you view the RFQ. And then they set their shipping information, which is pulled in from their GSA Advantage profile. We do have some buyers who manage multiple locations. They may post an RFQ that covers a couple of different locations. In general, they'll probably just pick one and post from there. After the RFQ has been submitted, all the contract holders under the category will be notified. The buyer at that point, prior to close, has the ability to forward the RFQ to any other members of their team They can collaborate on it. Perhaps it's a subject matter expert and a contracting person working together. The buyer does have the ability to modify the RFQ details. Maybe they need to add more attachments. Maybe they need to refine some of the language because they've been getting questions, or maybe they want to change the closing date. Now, the buyer can extend the closing date into the future, but they cannot shorten the period. So once an RFQ is open for a certain date, it can't close earlier than that unless the buyer cancels it outright. So that's something to take a look at when you see RFQs that are being modified. The buyer does have the option to cancel the RFQ, and they could reissue it or they might not. So that is how we got to an RFQ existing inside this list. But once again, let's jump back to the seller side now, a little slower this time. Click on the Find Opportunities Now button in the middle of the screen, and you will see a list of the RFQs that have been posted. Click on the RFQ ID number, and you will arrive inside the Prepare Quote Response page. Now, just like I showed for the buyer, here's what is involved in preparing a quote response. First, you'll see the RFQ detail section with a lot of the items that I mentioned, or with all of the items that I mentioned in the previous explanation. You will want to enter your quote expiration date, your line item pricing if line items have been requested and have been articulated line by line. Select a shipping type, be it FOB origin, FOB destination, and any costs associated therewith. You can attach any files that will help explain your quote or help substantiate it. And you can enter comments that you believe the vendor might, that the buyer might need in order to evaluate your quote. So let's go bit by bit here. First thing you're going to do is indicate how long your quote is good until. Now, we generally encourage vendors to give buyers enough time to evaluate the quote based on the complexity of what the request is. For those volume discounts I mentioned earlier, maybe a couple of days is enough. And as you can see here, eBuy requires a minimum of 7 days from the close date of the RFQ. However, if it's a more complicated procurement, you might want to give the buyer a couple of weeks, maybe even a month, depending on how complicated the quote is. And you always have the option of updating this date in the event that the time passes. If your quote has expired, eBuy will not let the buyer make an award notification to an expired quote. So it's just something to keep in mind as you go through. Here is where you would select your shipping type. We have FOB destination, FOB origin prepaid, and FOB origin, I believe that's general bill of lading. You would also enter a transportation cost if FOB is origin. You can attach your documentation here. Click on the rectangular area to either activate a upload dialog, or if you have multiple windows open at once, you can just drag a file over to that area and it will attach to the site. Personally, I prefer to click and I prefer to have the window come up and select the file, but whatever works for you, you can do. The file will then be attached to the quote. In general, each single attachment must be less than 100 meg in size. You, I believe, can have as many attachments as you want. Don't think there's a limit on how many, but just keep the size in mind as you attach them. You also have to be cognizant of the file name. They cannot have special characters in the file name or excess spaces. Most file types will work. People generally stick to the standard PDF, Microsoft Office formats, JPEGs, things like that. Specialized file formats, be cognizant of whether or not the person who's going to receive that attachment has the software to view it. So if you were attaching some kind of schematic or some kind of special graphic that requires a program that not many people have, you could indicate in your comment section or by reaching out to the buyer that that's what you've done. Either way, go through and add your attachments to the quote. And when you see them all in green and the upload complete dialog, you'll know they've been attached to the quote. At the very bottom, you can input your quote pricing. In the case of a lot of these services quotes, the people use the attachment to articulate some of the line item pricing, so they can put in a bottom line price here in this dialog box, and that way that will appear to the buyer. You can also enter any comments that you might want to further explain your attachments or your quote in general. Once you've completed filling out the quote, click Submit Quote, and you will see the dialog change. You'll see a quote submitted successfully button at the top, and you will see a little green checkbox next to any RFQ that you have quoted on. Sometimes folks like to go back later. They like to compile RFQs, and they may forget which ones they've quoted on. So having that visual indicator means that you have submitted a quote. You do have the option to update your quote. If you want to update it, simply access the quote through your history by way of the RFQs tab or the My Quotes tab. Click Update Quote, and you will be prompted to enter a reason for updating the quote, and you will have edit access to the different fields in the quote screen. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps you're extending the quote good until date, perhaps you're updating the price based on information you receive, perhaps you're adding an attachment. Whatever it is, give a description and then click Review Submit when you are ready to submit the changes. You can see here in this example, we've updated the quote total from 1 million to 1.2 million. This is the review screen that you'll see when you click on the update reason. And now let's move on to managing users. Once again, sign in to eBuy from the home page or by way of Okta. And you may, if you are a point of contact on more than one contract, you may be presented with this screen here where you have to select which contract it is you want to work on. So if you see this modal pop up, open the drop down. You'll have a couple of different contracts listed there that you can select from. Select the one that you want to work on and click Close, and you will proceed through the rest of the system working on that contract. Now, as far as managing points of contact, you can go into the profile page by clicking the profile button up at the top, and you will see a list of all of the points of contact that you have listed on this contract. Now, a quick word about how these work. Each point of contact is by category. It is the first point of contact in the list that will receive the emails. This is not intended to be a comprehensive access management tool, and you cannot edit points of contact. You can only add or remove them. If you want to add a new point of contact to a category, click the Add New Point of Contact to a Category button, and you'll be presented with a pop-up where you can add the name, phone number, and email address of the point of contact and select a category to add them to. So as I mentioned earlier, this is not total access control. It's about who is going to get notified for each of the categories. The Profile tab in eBuy will pull a list of everybody who is listed under that contract, and whoever is first in the list is the one that the buyer will see when they go through and create an RFQ. As I mentioned, you can't edit the point of contact. You can only add or delete them. This has to do with how we use Okta to power the FAS-ID. I'm not sure the percentage of folks out there who may have had contracts before or may have other contracts in GSA, but for anyone who was an existing point of contact at the time we implemented the multi-factor authentication and the FAS-ID, the existing points of contact were ported into the new system, into the new method. New contracts, though, will have to register. So if you are the first point of contact on your contract, you would go to the Vendor Support Center, where there is a link you would click to register the contract. If you find that someone else has already registered your contract for you, you would need to contact that person for them to add you. So to summarize, we covered eBuy and its uses. I took you through some business statistics. We walked through the RFQ process, both as a buyer posting an RFQ and as a GWAX seller quoting on an RFQ. And we discussed point of contact management. And that took a lot less time than I thought it would. So hopefully that's a good thing. And at this point, I will open it up for any questions.
Sounds good, Peter. I will just provide you with the question if you have an answer, or we can always direct them to follow up with us following this session. So the first one I have here is you discussed the expiration field. Does the expiration reflect what the OCO defines in the RFQ, RFP, or only the 7 days and the industry partner would need to change that?
So what that date does is it's how long that the quote is able to be given an award notification to on eBuy. So it's best practice to make sure that you give the buyer enough time to go through and make an award notification without any of the quotes expiring. I believe you're asking whether it's tied into the terms and conditions of the contract or something along those lines. No, it's not that deeply embedded. The value of that date is to make sure that the quotes are able to be quoted on in the system.
Sounds good. Next question. Is there a character limitation in the comments when you submit a proposal?
Folks have asked that before, and if there is, I don't believe it's ever been broken. I have seen RFQs where folks posted almost entire statements of work inside that comment field. I don't recommend testing the character limit on it, but I don't think we've had any complaints about that field being able to allow adequate comment.
Thanks, Peter. The next one is the prompt payment discount calculated in the bidder's price automatically?
I am going to have to research that question. So if we could compile a list of the ones that I'm not sure about, I'd rather get you a good answer than try to guess.
Next question. When submitting a quote through the system, what formats does it accept? Excel, Word, PDF?
Right. So that's what most people are going to use. As far as blocked file extensions, I believe the only ones that are blocked are ones that could potentially be executable. So you won't be able to upload an exe or a batch or a script or anything like that. If you stick to PDF, Excel, Word, JPEG, the most common file types, you shouldn't have a problem.
And if there is a problem, would you encourage them to reach out to the vendor support center?
Yes, or the eTools help desk. The contact information should be on the eBuy homepage.
Sounds good. Next question. If we receive a request for quote or request for proposal and we are not going to respond, do we need to check no quote, or is that required?
It is not required, but it is good etiquette to click no quote. If you are
Absolutely.
not
I know that's great for the contracting officer to know, hey, I've gotten everything in, these X number are not quoting, so they're not missing anything or not concerned about receiving things late. If you can no quote, please do.
Yeah, and just to jump back to the previous question about who you contact, the email and phone number for the vendor support center are both listed at the bottom of the eBuy homepage. So that resource is there for you.
Peter, a question we've gotten multiple of, it's kind of two-part. One is there a way to combine all of your eBuy accounts? So if you have a mass contract, you have an Oasis, and you have a Stars 3, so that you don't have to sign out and sign back into each individually?
I am not 100% sure that you can combine different types of contract. That is also something I am going to have to research. When we went through and captured these screens, we spent quite a bit of time on that page, and I did not see a way to combine it. I will double check for you, but I don't I don't believe you. I will double check.
Sounds good. I know in years prior, but this was my experience in eBuy, that you were able to combine them under one login, but that may not be the case now. So we'll get you all an answer, definitely.
Yeah, with the implementation of the Fast ID, some things have changed. So yeah, I'm gonna have to double check on that one and get you a certain answer.
And I had another question about RFPs on Stars 3 that I'll go ahead and answer. I'm told that there was one posted yesterday. I have not seen that yet, but it sounds like there has been one. So for those of you who've been asking if there's anything live on eBuy, it sounds like one was posted yesterday, and it would be in that specific area that they select. So that could be Stars 3 in general, or it could be ET or OCONUS. I'm not certain.
This capability was literally turned on, what, a day or two ago?
I think on Friday. So
on
yeah,
Friday. So
we're getting all the customers educated. I sent out a mass email on Friday letting them know that it was live and they can now issue RFPs, RFIs on the system. So
yeah, so brand new. I'm sure the traffic will pick up.
absolutely. Another question, if you happen to know, is how to clear your messages in the message center.
I do not know how to do that. So I will ask that question. I thought that they once read, I thought they could be archived. So I will have to get you an answer on that one.
Sounds good. I'll take this next question. Is there a way to know how many vendors a particular RFP, RFQ request was sent to? On Stars 3 for fair opportunity, it is only for competitive. So essentially it's going out to everyone unless they have some type of fair opportunity exception. So that could be some type of other set aside, although, generally that's limited on the GWAX. So the simple answer would be it's likely going out to everyone within the selected area on the contract. Next question. If an RFQ or RFI lists that the contracting officer is expecting an email submission, do you still submit anything through eBuy? I would say in general is to respond following whatever guidance that is that the contracting officer provides.
I always encourage folks to respond through eBuy. I am not a contracting officer myself, so I cannot speak to why one would use eBuy, but then ask for an email quote. But I always encourage folks to submit it through eBuy.
Another question that we have here that I'll answer, Stars 3 sole sources, do they need to go through SBA? So yes, for Stars 3 sole sources, an offer acceptance is required through SBA. We have provided our contracting officers with a template and points of contact on our website. So try to make that as streamlined as possible for them. Next question. As a contractor, I will only be able to access the site as a seller. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. You cannot register as a buyer. Buyers have to have a .mil or .gov email address and be authenticated by way of that.
Another question is regarding how many individuals that you can have on an account to receive notifications. Is there a limit on that for adding points of contact?
Well, I see the second part of the question is, or will we have to log in daily and check for opportunities? And I find that most folks get the most out of eBuy when they do log in and check for new opportunities. So I would encourage you to do that based on the activity of your category. Speaking for mass, I know there can be hundreds of RFQs posted in a single day under, say, the IT super category. The same may not be true for other categories.
Related question, can multiple users manage the eBuy profile? Or is it that sole main POC and then having others included?
I wouldn't, if you're asking what I think you're asking, I would not recommend sharing a profile since it is tied to a FAS ID. So you're essentially sharing an identity. It's different than how it was before, where there was kind of a contract login. So I would not recommend it.
Next question, are there any requirements that are different between mass eBuy and GSA GWAC eBuy?
By requirements, do you mean what the seller has to provide? Or I'm a little confused about how to address that question. eBuy at its heart is a platform through which the buyer and seller can exchange the required documentation for a quote. Each individual procurement is different given the breadth of products and services that the tool covers. So I'm not quite sure answer that.
Yeah, we'll see if they type in any further information. An additional question, do all of the points of contact have the ability to respond to RFPs, RFIs? I think they mean if there's multiple listed for a particular organization.
I believe so, yes. That's what I meant when I was talking about how this is not an access management tool. The profile and the different folks in the different categories was mainly about notifications.
And I believe you can set up a notification that will send you like a consolidated report daily, weekly, etc.
I believe so.
I'm just looking through here to see any additional questions that have come in that we've not answered.
I do see a follow-up about the one of responding by email, not through eBuy. The benefit of submitting, well, the one other benefit of submitting a quote via eBuy is that you then get the notifications about the RFQ as it's modified or as it's updated or as it closes. And plus, you have that extra official record of having submitted the quote. eBuy stores, like for the buyers, at least eBuy stores. I mean, it does for the sellers too, but eBuy is compliant with records retention policies. And so paperless environment to store all this history. So it doesn't hurt to send the RFQ in through, or to send your quote through eBuy.
Is there a file size limitation for any of the uploads?
Yes, each individual upload cannot exceed 100 meg. You can upload multiple files. If you find yourself needing more space, you might have to break a file into multiple parts. But yes, the limit is 100 meg per individual attachment.
And I'll take another question we have here, which is if eBuy is used for competitive task orders, where would we see sole source RFPs or RFIs? That would be up to the agency, but generally they would email those, communicating with you directly as a potential offer. And of course, we always encourage you to be out there promoting and working with agencies to utilize the contract directly as a sole source. We had another question there, and if you can do it verbally, you don't have to show your slides again, but is there any guidance you have on setting up to have those daily reports provided?
I will have to look into that, on how to do that and get those to you, Lori, so that they can be shared with the rest of the team, because I would want to be able to provide a little bit more instruction than off the top of my head.
Sounds good. Sounds like we'll have a few items to follow up with you all on when we provide a copy of this recording later on this week. We had a question here about scope review. I think that's obviously a little bit different than the eBuy, but just to go ahead and provide some information on that. GSA will do a scope review if you have a customer who is not sure if their scope fits within 8A Stars 3. We're happy to take a look at that. We actually have a scope review tool that's linked from our website that they can then provide their contact information and upload any documents for our review.
I see some questions about the FAS ID again. Like, are notifications also pushed to the GSA FAS ID person? The FAS ID is, how to articulate that? I mean, the FAS, your FAS ID is your account. So if you are set up in eBuy as a contract point of contact under a certain category, you should receive the notifications. If you, I believe there are cases where you have folks on a contract, but who are not necessarily loaded into eBuy, but perhaps they're doing sales reporting, or they're doing mass mods, or they're doing something else related to the contract that uses the FAS ID. And kind of similar response to the question preceding it, which if you had an eBuy account and a new FAS account, how do you see the FAS items? I apologize. Which FAS items are you referring to? The other systems in your workspace, or are you referring to something specific to eBuy? We'll put a pin in that one for a second. The contracting officer info, there's a couple of different places you could find this. If you mean the buyer info, that should be listed on the RFQ when you view it. It was up there at the top in the RFQ information. If you're talking about for specific contracts, you might be able to use, there's points of contact for contracts listed, for contracting officers listed in eLibrary, in GSA's eLibrary, if you want to comb through there.
And we've had a couple of questions about not seeing stars 3 in eBuy. So I would definitely encourage you to make sure that you are registered within the eBuy system. I know S3 at gsa.gov sent out instructions last week. And then if you're still having some issues, definitely reach out to the vendor support center so that we can make sure that you're viewing everything that you should be able to.
Will you forward that email to me as well, Lori? I'd love to see the instructions that are being sent out, because I could incorporate them into this deck in the future.
And just to note, I think we've only got a handful, maybe 10 or so, that have not completed the eBuy registration. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it's an active group. That's what we like to see. They're raring to go. I see a question about eBuy having an API you can use to pull the RFPs posted on the site. I have to point out that eBuy is a request for quote system, not a request for proposal system. But to answer that question, no, I don't believe we let anybody hook into an eBuy API. I think there are other products that GSA offers for agency to agency transfers, but not an API that you can plug into to pull the data out of eBuy. I mean, it's certainly a feature you can request. One of the great things about doing these trainings is getting to bring the feedback from the community over to the development team or to the product owner and business owner and make these suggestions. In the past, a lot of suggestions we've received from users have ended up becoming features in the system.
I see one question here that said that eBuy is an RFQ system, not an RFP system, but I believe you can issue RFQ, RFP, and RFIs as well.
You can flag a request for quote as a request for information, but I have always when I've given these presentations and at the advice of folks who are knowledgeable about contracting, made sure to differentiate between quote and proposal, because those are different things from a contractual perspective. And eBuy is a request for quote system. By the way, the quotes that you submit via eBuy until there's an actual award made are not binding. My understanding is that a proposal works slightly differently, although that terminology could be specific to certain programs. So again, I am not a contracting officer, but I have always been told to state that eBuy is RFQ, not RFP. I do see a couple of folks chiming in on the point of contact issue. Yes, about how the first person who's on the contract will then have to add other folks to the contract. And I believe I covered that towards the end of the presentation with the point of contact management section, where you had the ability to add the point of contact to each category. So I'm glad that folks have been able to do that.
I want to say thank you for Andre for sharing again. The email address for eBuy system issues is vendor.support@gsa.gov. You can also reach out to us at s3@gsa.gov, and we'll make sure we get you directed to them as well.
See a question about the buyer setting the file type, as in not accepting certain files. If you are dead set against receiving a certain type of file, you could indicate, or the buyer could indicate as such in the comment section, but no, eBuy does not allow the buyer to toggle whether or not a certain type of file would be accepted or would be blocked. I'd love to hear the story behind that, why one might want to do that. If there is a reason to do it, that would be very interesting. Can I please explain the watch function? Certainly. So it's been a long time since I've checked this out, but by watching an RFQ indicates that if you click watch that you want to watch an RFQ, then you will get all of the notifications that the notifications that you would get if you had quoted. So I'd mentioned earlier to the person who asked about whether or not submitting the quote through eBuy versus email was advantageous. And I said that by submitting the quote, you would get all the notifications if the RFQ is updated or canceled. So by watching an RFQ, it's like subscribing to get all those notifications about the RFQ. So that is what the watch function does. I wanted to mention that. I wasn't 100% sure it was still a thing. So glad to hear that it is. Not sure how to address the question about the RFQs not appearing in the same pool.
Yeah, I think the question that Jim had might have to do with, if they were able to issue an RFI and they put it out on multiple, which we did have another question about that. Like, let's say that a contracting officer doesn't know which contract to use, or is really doing some very high level market research. They might post it on the VETS GWAC. They might post it on multiple award schedules. They might post that RFI on STARS 3 as well. I think the question is, how would they find out which one the customer ultimately chose? And I don't think that would be available in eBuy at any point. Generally, there is an OCO listed, and whoever's issuing that RFP on the eBuy or RFI on the eBuy post.
Right, unless the buyer ultimately posting the RFQ ties it to the RFI by saying something like this is a follow-on from, gives the number. There's no way for the buyer to tie the two together.
And I will say, with my experience on stars too, we do often see contracting officers who, they're seriously doing market research because they don't know if a certain capability exists on the contract, or if there are industry partners who have experience with the type of project they're doing. So I would say don't disregard an RFI. I know that sometimes they kind of seem arduous, or they're asking for a lot of information, but it's really that contracting officer trying to understand if stars 3 is the best solution for them.
I've seen instances where folks will post their draft requirements as RFIs to solicit feedback. It's a nice vehicle for doing that. I'm part of another project that took a similar strategy, and it was very helpful to put out the draft and get the comments and then be able to refine, which saved us a bunch of time later because all the clarifications had been taken care of. So yeah, I second what Lori said. RFIs are people looking for information.
I know we're getting close to our 1 hour. If there's still any remaining questions that you have following this session, definitely reach out to s3@gsa.gov. I know we've got some questions in the inbox that are not specifically eBuy related, but I'm happy to answer those if you want to reach out to s3@gsa.gov as well.
I see the bottom question. When an RFQ is saved to draft, it submits the quote, it appears. Forgive me, I'm getting tripped up on the syntax. An RFQ that's saved to draft won't appear for sellers to quote on until the buyer decides to complete the RFQ. I had a couple saved in my profile for years because I was only using them to snag screenshots.
I see a question from Antonio, and I'm not sure if you know, Peter, how do you change the eBuy email? I'm assuming that's the primary eBuy email.
I'm not sure to what that refers to. The FAS ID would contain the individual's email.
Antonio, if you want to reach out to s3@gsa.gov on that one, we'll make sure we get you an answer.
If you mean the email that you used to register, I believe you'd have to work through your FAS ID. If only one contractor replied to a request for information, do contracting officers generally divert to other buying sources, or would they propose a sole source? That's very situation specific. I can't answer that with any certainty. Lori, do you have experience in that?
It really depends on the contracting officer and the agency requirements. When we talk about sole source, of course, there are some limitations on that and exceptions to fair opportunity. So it's hard to give a one answer that would cover everything there. There's a question about getting a registration email resent. As I mentioned before, there are only a handful that have not completed the eBuy registration. I think at last there were 10, approximately 10. So if you are not registered in eBuy, definitely reach out to us, s3@gsa.gov, or if you want to double check, that's fine as well. We just want to make sure that you all are set up and able to respond to any of the posts from agencies. I see the next question. If an RFI is looking for 5 different task areas and your company can only offer 2 of them, is it still worthwhile to respond to an RFI? That, of course, would be a business decision. Obviously, there's subcontract capabilities, but you'd have to follow subcontracting policies. But that would really be a business decision that you would have to determine.
Yeah, I'll second that. Well, I can't speak to how that would work under 8A Stars 3. On the mass world, we've seen eBuy has the ability to do partial awards. So we have seen in the past, sometimes an RFQ will get awarded to 2 different quoters.
Generally, we wouldn't see that on the GWAC side, just FYI.
Oh, okay.
A little bit of difference between the 2. Peter, we are up against the hour, so I will go ahead and close out this session. Again, if you still have remaining questions, reach out to s3@gsa.gov. If it's system specific, vendor.support@gsa.gov. We'll all be happy to try to address your questions. I will be following up with a link to this recorded session later this week and some of the questions that Peter and I promised to respond to as well. And I definitely want to thank Peter for his expertise. While he is not a GWAC expert, we're teaching him. We're giving him some of the key information on our programs. But we really appreciate your eBuy expertise and your willingness to share that today.
Well, you're very welcome. It was a pleasure.